All right. Well, we are live, and tonight got a special guest, Steve Kulls, who has the show Squatch DTV. He's known as a Squatch detective, and he's got a new book out, which I've got right here: The Psychology of Bigfoot, a guide to understanding Bigfoot claims. And I actually just finished reading this, and it's very interesting. I've got a link to buy the book down in the description down there, so I encourage you guys to get this. Steve has a lot of experience interviewing people, and spent quite a few years with it, and we're going to talk to him about that. Hello, Sandra, in chat, and hopefully we're all going to learn something. Also, in the description down there, I've got a link to my book, Kiamichi Bigfoot, Investigating the Oklahoma Sasquatch. So if you haven't got a copy of that, I encourage you to get some if you're interested in the Bigfoot subject in Oklahoma. So like I say, tonight, though, we're going to bring on Steve Kulls, and he's going to talk to us about his book. And if you're here, if you've not subscribed to my channel, hit that subscribe. It doesn't cost anything, but it helps me a lot, too. And we got some people coming in the chat. We got my buddy Mark, Livewire, Jay Fritz, David Weathers. How you doing there? And as Squatch DTV, he's also lurking in the chat as well as backstage. So what we're going to do now, we're going to bring Steve on and let him talk to us about the psychology of Bigfoot and understanding Bigfoot claims and the people that make these reports. So let's see, we're bringing you, there you are. I hit the wrong button, Steve. I just about kicked you off the show.
Wouldn't be the first time.
It would have been unintentional. How you doing, man?
I am doing wonderful.
Yeah, great. Well, the chat, we got a few people in chat now. So your hello to everybody must have encouraged them. But yeah, there's my buddy Will Starr. I always plug his channel too. Will has a great channel, Will Starr Monsters and Mysteries. He's come down here to Oklahoma and made it safely out of the woods with me. And he's got a good channel. He especially redoes accounts of those old historical accounts, which is great.
Nice.
Got a Nana Anna. Hey, Nana, I haven't seen you in a while. How are you doing there? Sandra Piper, Texas Jack, David Weathers, and Jay Livewire. So anyway, so what have you been up to, Steve, other than writing good new books?
Well, yeah. It's funny, most of that book was written towards the end of last year. Finished it up first quarter this year. Took a month, got it out. And yeah, investigated a couple of interesting sightings this last few months. One is really, really good down in southern Albany County on the Hildeberg Mountain Range. And, went out there, talked to the witness like within 72 hours of him having a sighting, which is a great thing to get out to the actual location, knowing that less than a week ago, somebody had allegedly saw a Bigfoot there. And went back at another time with me and the missus just to go out there and check things out and kind of sit at night. And wouldn't you know, we're walking in just about getting to the area where we had the sighting, and something just made a huge movement out of the woods, like one of the largest pops I ever heard. Like something had stepped on a big log that was dead and it just went pop. It was low in bass, low tone, high decibel. I mean, it was like, and didn't hear an amble off like you would hear a bear or a deer or a moose or anything like that. So I'm like, that was very interesting. And that was the extent of our activity for the night, almost like we had scared something off. And that was it. So the investigation continues. That's all I can say about that. We did collect some potential DNA evidence. I don't know if it is, but that'll all feather out. I got to get that off to Dr. Orcutt down there at the University of North Carolina to check that out. But
okay. Hey, for those here that may not know, where are you at, Steve, as far as
I am in
investigations and stuff?
I am located about 30 miles south of the Bigfoot capital of New York State, which is Whitehall, New York. So I live in southern
Yeah.
Washington County, New York, right across the river from Saratoga County, New York. In fact, I can walk within 2 minutes and be in Saratoga County. And that's about 25 miles north of Albany, New York. So I live in upstate New York, very close to within 25 miles of the Vermont border, within 50 miles of the Massachusetts border, and within a couple of hours of the Canadian border.
Okay. Well, you're not too terribly far from my buddy Cornell up there, are you? He's up
Where's
there in
Cornell from?
Massachusetts. He's in Massachusetts.
Okay, yeah,
He lives out in the country, a good ways from Boston. So
right. Well, I can I can get to the farthest end of Boston within 4 hours. So,
okay.
in fact, and the funny thing is that I can get to the farthest end of Massachusetts rather in 4 hours, but it takes me 5.5 hours to get to the farthest end of New York. Just shows you how big New York is.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, your kind of moniker is the Squatch Detective, and you have a background in investigations and stuff. You want to tell us a little bit about that? And this is for the benefit of anybody that happens to be in chat that's not familiar.
I have spent about 35 years or so working in the private sector of investigation. I worked a lot of times in concert with law enforcement. I've trained at some of the interrogation interview schools with law enforcement. In fact, my very first course is the same course that at the time the FBI was giving their interrogators interviewers. That was the John Reed School of Interrogation and Interview. And then eventually I took the Wicklander one, which is more of a psychological model than the Reed is now. So I've had, and then there was I took the Wicklander neurolinguistics. I've recently taken some more body language. And what these schools do is they teach you some psychology of why people do things, how to minimalize the moral rationalizations and morals of it. And, basically how to elicit an admission without making the person feel totally useless, for the better lack of a word. If you ever notice that there's a lot of anytime you watch these true crime shows, when they go to that interrogation, well, I can sit there and go, oh, that detective's going about it all wrong, because it's not about pounding your fist on a table saying you did it, you know it, you have it. And there's no bad cop in what we do.
Right.
It's only trying to understand why the person, and it's always coming from the approach. Listen, I know the who, the what, and the when. We're just looking for the why, and tell us the why. And usually if you find a normal, rationalized person that's not a sociopath, psychopath, that lacks any of the maladies of psychological impairment, generally they have a guilt associated with that. And a lot of times criminals will, you ever notice that when you watch these shows that the murder suspect will try to lay it off as self-defense, or it went off by accident. Oh, well, I didn't mean to shoot him. I held the gun up to him. It went off. It was an accident. What they're actually trying to do is, in their mind, lower that moral that moral implication of doing the act. So if they tell themselves, "Oh, it was an accident, it just went off," it lowers that hey, you're evil and you shot and killed this person. It kind of lowers that expectation. And we see that across the board in all crimes. I took it not because I was greedy, not because I want to go out and blow it on drugs or alcohol or just have a good time, or I'm greedy and nobody's going to notice stealing from the store, but they take it. But I needed to pay my bills, and I only make a few dollars an hour, and so they find other rationalizations, and they're same things with sexual crimes as well. But we won't get into that. But there's always a lack. There's always a lesson of the moralization. So when you go and interview somebody, you got to keep those rationalizations and those reasons why people do these misdeeds in line. And now the one thing that I did find is that when somebody hoaxes something like a Bigfoot sighting or a UFO sighting or whatever, the rationalization is the same, and people say, well, it's not a crime, but it's trying to do a wrong to somebody. So it's not necessarily about whether it breaks a law that is written. It kind of breaks a moral code that we don't lie to one another. We don't lie. We tell the truth. If we're going to put a story out there, it's going to be truthful. We're trying to get this story of saying, hey, I saw a Bigfoot. This is what happened, A, B, C, D, E, or I got this video or photo, A, B, C, D, E. And if they're trying to pull one over on us, it still has the same mental implications that any other crime does too. So in that respect, you go at it the same way you would any other particular, violation of law, because it's not really like I said, it's not a violation of written law, but it's a violation of moral law when you lie to somebody and you try to pull one over or hoax them.
Okay. Now I'm going to back up just a little bit here because you've been in private investigation before, like a PI.
Yeah.
How did that segue into, or what inspired you to start investigating Bigfoot sightings?
Great question. Well, I love a good mystery. And a friend of mine,
I've used that same thing.
Yeah, I love a good mystery. But my friend had showed me this book that called Monsters of the Northwoods. Great book written by Robert and Paul Bartholomew, Bruce Allenbeck, and Bill Bram. Two of which became my mentors. One unfortunately passed away rather recently, Bill Bram, who just passed away this past year. And it was about Bigfoot sightings in my backyard, basically, within an hour. At the time, I lived a little bit further south from where I live now. So it's about an hour and a half away from where I live. But still, that's my backyard. Because as an investigator, I was used to going all over the state. So I'm like, wow, this is only an hour away. This is pretty close. So when I saw this, I go, you know what? I bet you this is all a bunch of baloney. And as I started investigating people, including police officers and firefighters and other scientists that had had these sightings in my area locally, I realized that in watching them, putting them through that forensic interview, I realized that their body language, their physiological reactions to telling the story were consistent of somebody telling the truth. And that was huge.
Okay. Now, have you personally ever observed one of these creatures?
Twice.
Wow.
Once in 2011 and once in 2012.
Now, was this in New York State or
both were in my research area number one, and they were both naked eye sightings. I have over the years had a couple of what I believe were sightings through equipment, but they were dark masses or this was with my own naked eyes, the flashlight on one in particular. In the following year was just me and the eyes, straight on eyes. First one was about anywhere from about 100 to 125 feet away, standing next to a utility pole. I had my team in the camp. It was actually watching our campsite while we were at the fire. I went out to get some batteries out of my car and decided to light a smoke, take a look up and down, and there it is, watching our campfire. Stood there, watched it for about 30 to 40 to 50 seconds, whatever it was.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't keeping time of it, that's for sure. And after just staring at it, and the eyes were shining back at me, so it was very indicative of something having a pedum lucidum, which is that mechanism of the eye. A dark orange glow. They were blinking at me, which was kind of freaky. And then I just moved the light a little bit and it proceeded back into the wood line. For the following year, I had another camp out, and we were actually camping there. And I was about 1:30 in the morning. I decided I needed to use a tree. I start to unzip the tent, and as I stick my head out, I watch in mid-flight this 5.5-foot juvenile Sasquatch, long reddish brown hair, just running away. And my first reaction to that was like, nah, it couldn't be. And then the next morning I get up, and one of the guys in the camp said something left a log behind his Jeep and stuff. So it was like, huh.
Wow.
So there was a lot of weird stuff. But like I said, haven't seen anything since 2012.
Well, the fact that you've seen something at all is like winning the lottery.
Yeah, I tell you. And like I said, the second time it was like, no, I couldn't have just seen that. Because it was just like so quick. I opened up, there it is. I'm like, no. Because as I'm entering a tent, you mind you, I get this blind spot as the tent goes, so it runs out of my sight, and I'm like, I'm not gonna go after it. Everybody's sleeping. I'm not gonna. No, I couldn't have seen that. I couldn't have seen that. And I was tired. We were all exhausted. I went back to bed. And the next morning, I get woken up by Jeff Thomas, who's like, Steve, something left a log behind my Jeep last night. I just went out at 11 o'clock because he had went out to his Jeep at 11 o'clock to get his pillow and blanket to put in his tent because it had been raining. And he wasn't sure it was a new tent. So he was making sure that I don't want a wet pillow and blanket. At least I'll have that dry. I'll just keep it in the last minute. And the tent's dry at 11 o'clock at night. I'll use it in the tent. So he went out, got his pillow and blanket, and next morning gets up to put it back in, and there's a log sitting right behind his Jeep that wasn't there the previous night. And it was a birch log, and we had been collecting a lot of birch that day too, which was kind of bizarre. So
the one that you saw beside the highline pole, how big would you estimate that one?
That sucker was about 8 foot tall.
Okay.
I got a real good video that's out, and every once in a while I'll drop it. But I had a videographer with my ops team 1 that night, and he came out and actually interviewed me like within 5 minutes of me having a sighting. And we actually shine it on the tree, and we have one of my team leaders out there trying to measure the height, and he's got a flashlight trying to say how high it was, and he was like, yeah, that's about 8 foot. When I said where the eyes were. And then they actually found what they believe is a track going into the woods where it had stepped into the wood line because it was kind of a step up. And you could actually still see dirt coming in off of it. So really, really cool event. And I didn't, believe it or not, it was a couple of years before I knew they even found it, or before I even remembered that, because I was busy. While they're doing this, you can hear me in the background. Okay, I want another team on the north side. I was coordinating people again. I was back into my mode again. Like, okay, I got to get people out here. The base camp was hearing it walking around the camp because they were yelling, hey, we got a lot of activity in the southwest side of the camp. So, all right, I want a team, Ops Team B. I need them to go up the road on the north side. We're on the south side of the road, so we should have it covered. We got the base camp team. And meanwhile, Ops Team 1 is still looking around. They're finding that track and stuff. And it was probably like a year later I started to actually watch the video. I'm like, they actually found something. Wow.
So I want to point this out to Chad. If anyone has any questions, please put those in caps. I try to get all of them. I'm not going to overlook anybody on purpose, but if it's in caps, it'll get my attention more. So Steve, let's talk a little bit about this book. Your inspiration for writing a book called The Psychology of Bigfoot, a guide to understanding Bigfoot claims. And I've been on your show before a couple of times when you've had, one comes to mind instantly. You had a fella claiming to be from my state of Oklahoma, and he was part of some group that ranchers paid to remove problem Sasquatches from their properties.
That wasn't actually my show. That
was
on another show, but we had taken that episode to review the body language.
Okay.
And when we heard the claims, there was a lot of neurolinguistic cues to that. There was a lot of what we call micro expressions in the face that were tipping off that he wasn't necessarily telling the truth about things. You would see things like a twitch or a grimace, or would see him. When we ask a tough question, you'd see him. The brows would furl in almost like a resentment type of pose, and they're quick. Because but if you learn to recognize things, you understand that the trigger points you're hitting on certain people.
Right. Well, I got ahead of myself a little bit. Let's say what inspired you to write a book on these things, like the body language of people, the motives of people that report and hoax or not.
Given my background, in 2012, I wrote a book called What Would Sasquatch Do? And it was basically talking about Bigfoot behavior within their habitats and basically primate behavior and how it related to Bigfoot behavior, because Bigfoot's a primate. So it's always been, a lot of this has been so much not about what this creature is, because I'm not a scientist. I'm not an ecologist, biologist, as well as any of that. I'm an investigator. And what I do thrive on is why, people do what they do, or why does a Sasquatch do what it does? So in 2012, I wrote this book about why Sasquatch may act a certain way, as kind of a guide to understanding their behaviors, so you can understand where it falls on basically the food chain of where they're living at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And this was just coming full circle. Now I'm taking a look at the people that report. Now, why is it so tough to get a photo? Why is it, why do people lie? Well, how to tell a truthful witness versus a one that's lying to you? And what I want to do is write a book that give people the foundations of why people believe what they do, even though in the face of certain evidence that tells them the opposite, they still believe that. And two, at the same time, understand the motivations of why people may tell the truth or tell a lie. So I think it was just coming full circle to give them that tool guide, that the tools and the thing to understand why, and to give them some ability to sit there and go, well, I wonder if this person's, and the summation is basically, listen, you need to take everything that you're told and put it through a sieve and shake it up and see what shakes out. And once you get that drain off, you'll look in the strainer, and that's what you have is the truth.
And as we discussed backstage before, we could get in depth on a lot of things in your book, but I don't want to discuss it to the point that nobody needs to buy it anymore.
Right.
We want people to get your book, but this is a very important thing. There's some people don't even report a sighting until years later, if ever. I've taken in a sighting of a road crossing that I have no doubt it's exactly what this guy's saying.
Sure.
And it happened in 97. And he just told me about it a few weeks ago.
And that's not surprising, because you think about it, how many crimes go unreported?
Right.
You think about it, how many assaults, sexual assaults go unreported? Tons. Person's embarrassed. Person feels like, how many white collar, like one of the things that, and just by happenstance, was the advanced fee fraud scams that happen. You see them, I'm Prince of such and such, and
Nigerian Prince.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's something called the romance scam, and the romance scam is even more devious. They pick on suspecting, and that's why you see all these cloned Facebook accounts a lot of times. It's because of these romance scams. And what happens is they'll tell somebody, they try to get a relationship with somebody going on, and yet they're off in another country, and they're coming back from an overseas assignment, whatever, and they'll pull at this person's heartstrings. Well, that gets so underreported. Because the person's embarrassed. They feel like, oh my goodness. So it's no surprise that people will underreport a Sasquatch sighting or a UFO sighting, or, even because, again, we all live at this moral rationalization, and part of that is sightings. Now, so I see that question up there. At one time, I'm no longer licensed. I'm a former private investigator. I retired out of that business in October. But I have been licensed. At one time, I was licensed in New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, and I think Connecticut as well. Depending on what company I was working for, they would obtain these licenses for me. But I've always maintained my license in New York State, which has one of the highest. New York State's a pain in the ass, pardon my French, to get a private investigator license. If I was a cop for 15 years, that does not qualify you to become a private investigator in New York.
Mm.
You have to be an investigator as an intern or serving in an investigation capacity for at least 3 years. And that's how I ended up getting mine. Wow. I was working for other investigators, and you have to submit all that. You have to submit the proof via affidavits. Then they have to do a background check of those affidavits, and then you have to submit your fingerprints and all that stuff. And you have to come up with a bond, and that's how you get licensed. Now, New York is next to California is probably one of the most stringent states to get a PI license. In fact, to be a police officer, you have to be a police officer for 19 years before you qualify for a private investigator license in New York State.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, in Oklahoma, you don't have to be a police officer. You can
Right.
be you just of course of course I was a reserve police officer for 13 years, um, and
And
that's been useful to me in this because you
absolutely.
learn you sure get to talk to a lot of people, talk to a
Yeah,
lot of people trying to pull one over on you too.
and she has to, you have to get a license for each state. Depends on the state. Like in New York State, yes, you have to get a New York State license to conduct investigations in New York. There's what they call reciprocity in certain states. Like if
Mhm.
you get a license, say in New York, I could go to Arizona and say, "Hey, I'm a licensed. I want to pay the fee to become a licensed in Arizona." They will give you a license. Some states will do that. New York State won't do that.
Mhm. Yeah, but Bat Mom, the laws are different in each
Right.
state. Even something, yeah, it's
Because the way
that.
New York, the
The
way
thing
New
is,
York
that
sees
would
it,
actually make sense, though, right?
right?
Right, Steve?
Yeah, they all want this. They all want the
Yeah,
greenbacks.
it's
It's a
the
matter
money.
of business. So yeah, they don't want you practicing in your state without paying the tax man or the
It's
government.
all about the money. I actually, when I was in the CLE classes, when we took the law block, one of the DA ladies that gave part of the class asked, she goes, "What have you taken away from this?" And I just, me being me, I said, "You want the truth?" And she said, "Well, yeah." I said, "It sounds like about 2% of the laws are for the public protection and the rest is where somebody gets paid." And she actually
Right.
agreed with me, which was a little disturbing.
Now, if you think about traffic courts, they're nothing but a money
Oh, my
generator
Lord.
for the
Yeah.
municipalities. It's all about the money.
So on the why do people hoax, I know you went through several different reasonings on them, a lot of mental things. Some are just people that don't think there's anything to this mystery whatsoever, and they're just playing a prank to have a good time.
Sure,
Then
and
you
they're
got
pretty easy. They're pretty easy to spot.
right,
You
yeah,
know,
they kind of give into it pretty quick. Attention seekers, some for profit. I don't know if anybody's made a ton of money, but I mean, there's been people make money.
well,
And
look at the gentleman, the promoter from the West Coast. The gentleman from the West Coast. You know,
up in Canada, that
no, I'll mention him by name, Biscardi. Um, you
oh
know,
yeah,
yeah.
Mr. Bigfoot, self-proclaimed. Yeah,
Yeah, the Godfather of Bigfoot, whatever you want, whatever moniker he's trying to go by now.
he
But
pops up every 5 or 6 years.
right, yeah. But the funny thing is, if you did, I probably know more about that organization than most people did because I dug, and I actually embedded myself undercover with them, getting their financials, believe it or not, through a little ruse. Is that I would borrow the vice president's flash drive to get his pictures to put on my flash drive, and of course, on his flash drive, he had all the financials of the company.
Oh
So
wow.
and what I noticed was at the time, of course, the company no longer exists, but at the time, he was using it. They were using investment money to pay off other investments, and what do we call that? That's called the Ponzi scheme. And it was no surprise
Mhm.
that, like back in I think 2008, 2009, their CFO, a guy by the name of Robert Nielsen, ended up getting indicted for a Ponzi scheme involving Nielsen's own company called Cedar Mortgage or Cedar Funding.
Oh
So,
wow.
and he actually went away for like, I think, 5 years or 6 years. It was a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme that he got nailed on. So it was
Wow.
no surprise that would occur. But a lot of people think that Biscardi actually hoaxed stuff. No, he would find stuff that's hoaxed. He knew it was hoaxed. He would promote it, trying to see where he can get a financial edge. But that wasn't his mainstay. That was all a front. The getting videos and Bigfoot films is all a front for getting
Mhm.
investment money from museums that never went up. He had been collecting money from museums since about 2006. And within like 3 or 4 years that I investigated him, he had already attained $500,000 about 4 museums, but not one museum ever went up.
Wow.
They were
So
designed
he was capitalizing on other people's hoaxes pretty much.
right.
Now you
And when he
remember the one that I think that was supposedly the two uh, guys down in, I believe it was Georgia, supposedly shot a Bigfoot. It was in
that
the
was my
freezer.
that was my first book I ever wrote, 50 Large.
Oh, okay. Well, the first thing I noticed about that was they were showing the pictures was, man, that Sasquatch sure does have good teeth. Because they just put some dentures in its mouth, remember?
Well, they used one was a denture, and they used some cow's teeth too, I think.
No, really. But yeah, that one was, and man, I mean, Biscardi, he really built that up like there's going to be a big reveal, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, they hoaxed me. They got to me.
Well, there was a reason for that.
It was entertaining.
There was a reason why he said they hoaxed me. The original plan was not for that. The original plan was to actually create a film. You remember the alien autopsy hoax? The film came out, right?
Yeah, back in the 90s.
He had told me a week before they had gotten the body that he was having that same film crew come out to film the autopsy of the Bigfoot. So when I get out there, within 24 hours, I discover it's fake. We melt it down, we start chipping at the ice, and we pull out a rubber foot. It's fake. Biscardi immediately tries to cover it up, saying, well, here's what we're going to do. We're all going to sign NDAs, not talk about it anymore. We're going to claim that the boys took their Bigfoot back to Georgia, and we're not going to talk about it anymore. But in the meantime, he was still going to have this film crew do an autopsy, right? That was my guess. And that was the major plan. Spring this film out, make a few million on the film, and then it goes into the nether and off to history forever. But he didn't count on one thing. Me saying I'm not going to sign it. That's how angry I was. I'm not going to sign an NDA to cover up a hoax. I'm sorry, this is a hoax. This needs to be out there. Mm-hmm. That threw a whole crimp in that thing, and that was the last time I ever talked to Biscardi. He was like, because I remember sitting on a round table with all his goons sitting there, and they were like, oh, whatever you say. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to cover up a hoax with a hoax. Mm-hmm. And he got very angry and hung up. And that was the last time I ever heard from Biscardi.
You're the first person I ever talked to that was actually that close to that thing, you know. But
a lot of times, here's the thing, a lot of times you'll see that hand in the freezer. One of the stock footage is that hand pulling that rubber foot up. That was my hand.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So if you had to just pin it down in all of your years of investigating this, it sounds like you've been looking into this pretty much the same amount of years as I have. You said about 25 years, and that's
98
when I started getting more, mid to late 90s when I started more seriously looking into these things. What's the number one reason that you found that people hoax?
The number one reason is they want to belong to something. They want to feel special. They want to elevate themselves within the group. That's not the major reason. Because if you look at it, finding money in this is the only place people get money out of this is, any kind of reputable or any kind of fashion is YouTube ad money. That's really so you do see a lot of, and people call them grifters, but they're not really grifters. That's a wrong terminology to use. A grifter is taking somebody's money and basically scamming them. That's what a grifter does. If I'm going to pull a grift, it's going to basically scam. But if you put out a false content, that's, caveat emptor. If people want to buy the shows, or the programs that say everything is a Bigfoot and they make some really miraculous claims, they're not really taking money out of people's pocket, and people are watching it for entertainment value. So they have found this niche to obtain some money for that. So that profiteer, since YouTube has existed, that profitability of hoaxing has gone up a little bit in compared to but if you go on social media, there's people that make these wild claims, and there's tons of them. Every stick structure is a Bigfoot. I go out into the woods, and we have all these encounters, but not a shred of evidence to prove any of it. And they just talk about it. Well, there was one there, and I was talking to them in Iroquois and blah, 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 or whatever, Cherokee or whatever.
Sharon says, I was watching Steve and Mr. Biscardi earlier. That's the reason I left that up there. You got a video about that?
I do. On my channel, I actually did a 50
I'll
large.
go back and watch that.
Years later, I did a whole expose on that because I wrote that book, I believe, right around 2010, 2011. And since it had been like, I think, 13 years since the book, I decided to do kind of a breakdown of the whole thing. I'm one of the few people that actually has the entire police report to that whole affair, too. I actually FOIL requested, got the whole 89-page police report from the Clayton County, Georgia Police Department about that whole thing, and it was very revealing, at least.
So let's see here. I want to get her, make sure I'm not missing anybody. This friend of mine here, Richard Stone, he says, anybody read the 100 Bigfoot Nights series? Can't decide if it's true events or fiction, but the first book was excellent. It was written as true events, but no location given. I'm not familiar with that, Richard.
Yeah, and generally, if you have somebody that's in this field for that length of time and hasn't heard about it, it's probably fiction.
Okay.
I hate to say it, it's probably fiction. And it may not be. Maybe somebody came forward, but if we haven't heard of the person or they haven't, it's very strange for somebody to say, well, I had all these experiences, I'm going to write a book about it. Very strange.
Right.
Usually they make some, because think about it. If I'm having these Bigfoot experiences, I want to talk to some people that are in the know to better understand. That's part of the process. It's part of the normal psychology of people, is that they have a Bigfoot sighting, they want to know, they want to understand what they've seen. And for somebody just to all of a sudden pop out of nowhere this book about that, it's kind of unusual. It's kind of suspect.
Okay. Yeah, by the way, Richard Stone there, he and I are supposed to go out on a outing into one of these areas here pretty quick. By the way, holler at me later, Richard, and so we can coordinate. Let's see what else we got here. I've seen something. Bat Mom asked Richard, "Isn't that Snow White Bigfoot's book?" Yeah, I don't know. So maybe you'd say that. So in your book, there's several different hoaxes and otherwise that you look into. One that really made the rounds, and it looks like you were kind of on the ground floor of investigating that. It's still making the rounds on the internet like it's true, even though it's been debunked, is the Bigfoot window peeper hoax.
Oh yeah. That is a classic. Here's a guy that gives us all the reasons and all the highlights to show how to not do a Bigfoot, because everybody does this. The first thing they do is look at that picture, and they focus on the picture. Now, somebody, and I didn't even make this in the book, somebody had actually made this, and I forget who it was, but it was a great thing. But think of a hoax. Think of a photo or a video. Think of it as a magician. Because what they got you wondering right here, you don't know what's going on, in the other hand, right? What do I have in my other hand? You don't know. Get a lighter. But you wouldn't know that. And that's the whole idea, is they put that picture up there so you focus on that picture, right? And then you look at the meat and potatoes of people forget what's the foundation of the picture, the story behind it, right? Here's this picture of Bigfoot. Well, where is it taken? Where, it could have been in my, So when you look at the foundation and you see that it's, and you have to look at everything from a psychological standpoint. And if you think about this story and there's big red flags. Well, I'm sitting watching television and my window is open and all of a sudden I smell this smell. I thought, isn't that strange? And then all of a sudden, here's this creature looking in my window. And I just so happen to have my video camera charging on my table next to me. So I sit there and I videotape it for 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Very right on point about that. And then my wife walked in. Well, wait a minute. Hold on. Time out. Your wife walked in. One would think that if your wife is out there and you have this thing in your front porch and you live in this rural area like you claim to have been, you would say, honey, don't go outside. There's something outside, right? Or, honey, come here, look at this, right? First thing a person wants is validation, right? But no, his wife walks in after 8 minutes of videotaping this, and she screams. And she runs off and calls the sheriff's department. But he doesn't name the sheriff's department. And the sheriff's department later on shows up, looks at the video, and says, oh, it's the most amazing thing they've ever seen. But again, doesn't name the sheriff's department. But after she screams and leads to call the sheriff's department, he puts the camera down and gets his gun, his 380. My point being is, that's if you're going to get your gun, you're going to do that first. Self-preservation is first. And that's a huge flag there. Wait, just because your wife screamed, now you got to get your gun? It's not doing, you've been sitting there videotaping it for 8 minutes. Now you're going to get your gun? Why? No reason, just because your wife screamed. Right? So the story on its basis did not make any sense to me. And that should be a red flag to anybody. But the problem is everybody is looking at what's being shown on the other hand instead of looking what's in the hand we're not paying attention to. And that happens with every, like the Colorado train sighting there that, look, they took, right. And then you have what I call 40 Shades of Thinkers on Girl of how this Colorado Bigfoot is really a Bigfoot when you listen to the story and they're like, oh, look, it's the elusive Sasquatch. And you listen to, yeah, that's true.
It's true there.
That's true. I mean, if my wife murdered me, she would initially get charged with, homicide, but it would probably get reduced down to justifiable homicide. So that's
But again, in Steve's book, he goes into the Bigfoot window peeper. He goes in depth on his investigation on that, and it's a very useful book. I mean, I can't tell you, I really enjoyed reading it. So what else here? And another
thing, like you said, being a former law enforcement for so many years, a lot of that stuff was just reinforcement of stuff you already knew.
Right. Yeah. But hey, you can always learn new stuff.
Oh yeah, true.
Very much so. One of the, and I hate to even call it a hoax because it's not per se, but something that's been making the rounds. It was on I think Thinker Thunker did a thing on these small little creatures, and he called them like a dog man type creature or whatever. It took me 5 minutes to find out where I'd found that. And it's the Monte people of Indonesia. And I'm going to throw this up there. If you see that right there, I'm just borrowing that. And that's what it is. It's over in Indonesia. Now, from what I've gathered, there really is a tribe of very seldom contacted people in the jungles that are called the Monte or Matewa people. Now, the ones in the video, I'm highly suspect that they are just some folks putting on some darker body paint and some animal skins on their head and interacting with tourists. But I'm going to play that a little bit so you'll see that.
Tienen el pelo grueso y parecen niños pequeños. Su rostro es cuadrado con frente estrecha, cejas juntas y nariz chata. Viven una vida nómada. Si se les acaba el alimento, buscan zonas fluviales, lugares donde se sientan cómodos. ¿Has tenido algún encuentro con alguna de estas criaturas?
Now, to me, that looks like some folks putting on a show for tourists, more than that. But
right.
there's a video of those same kids. Those are younger kids there, doing all these shenanigans in the dark around the still. And that's what that, and I even commented on, it's like, really, dude, just type in the Monte people. This is not what that is, but that's not a hoax per se.
And the first thing that reeks of hoax to me about that is these people supposedly had limited contact. You can get a video camera that close to them.
Exactly.
Right.
Now,
and
like
then they're acting normally, and they're acting this way and that way. And anybody that says they're a dog man or anything like that, that's some pretty potent stuff they're smoking. Because
and like I say, there is a seldom apparently contacted tribe called the Monte people there. I don't believe that's that. Yes, Raptor, those were children. But there's also, if you look there's more of adults dressing up like that too, and people going up handing them water bottles and stuff like that.
You know what's likely to happen to a cameraman finding the Monte people, right? You know what's likely to happen to them?
Well, I don't know if they're violent or not. I haven't looked that far into it, but boy. But anyway, but what do you think, Steve? The propensity of people wanting to believe that to the extent that no matter when it's debunked or whatever, they still like, no, that's what it is. And I'm just using that as an example.
Well, there's a couple of things I talk about, and it's called selective exposure, selective perception. It all has to do with confirmation bias. And, and I'll quote maybe out of the book: selective perception is once exposed to information, individuals may interpret in a way that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. Okay. They may unconsciously or consciously ignore or downplay evidence that contradicts their views. And that is probably, I believe this, and damn it, that's the way it is. And that's, and then they have something called selective retention, where they only retain the stuff that's important to them. And then there's something else called selective exposure, and those people will only watch those videos. And those are the people that will, like, if we come up to something, like for example, the Mississippi skunk ape video, which I debunked completely, being part of this TV show that existed back in, I want to say 2017, 2019, somewhere over there.
Okay.
And people will either not watch that video or gloss over it because it goes against their bias that this is a real video.
Now, which one are you talking about? I know there's one that looks like it's slamming a snake in the water, and then there's one ripping the bark off of a.
Yeah, it's the bark one, the one where.
Okay.
Right. And it's in Mississippi, but if you watch a TV show, it's supposed to happen in Louisiana, and there's all kinds of, the actor, there was the guy who took the video, Josh Highcliffe, was actually portrayed by an actor on the TV show, and the TV show was such a fake they even blurred Josh Highcliffe's face out, so he wouldn't be recognized by the public. Yet he was an actor, so there'd be no reason for him to do that, except they were trying to make this fake show into something that appeared to be real. It's a mockumentary.
Well, and it did look pretty good.
It did, but that's Hollywood. That's a Hollywood production. Right. Like, how crisp is that camera? That doesn't look like a cell phone camera, does it?
It looks pretty good, Steve.
Right. And that's problem number one right there. Okay. It's very stable. It's very set. It's, it doesn't look like a cell phone. That's issue number one.
I want to say this too, just for anybody thinking we're just going to sit here and talk about hoaxes. We're not. I'm going to move on very shortly to some of the credible cases that Steve's looked into. I've got some good ones that I've looked into over the years. I know Steve does too. Two more I want to briefly visit here. And this is just a question on there because we discussed it the other night on Nikki's show. Freeman footage versus Patterson footage. Both real, both fake, one real. What's your opinion on both?
Of course, one can never say with certainty if they're real or fake.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm in the ballpark. I'm leaning towards both of them being authentic, with the Patterson one being a little bit more up on the scale than the Freeman one. But and the reason why is, if you think about, at least by any standard, If they're hoaxes, they're damned good hoaxes. And the reason why is because you have before and after video or film of the incident. You have a lot of documentation of the who, what, when, where, and why. And that for me says, groundbreaking things than what we've seen of other films like The Prince, and there was other film that had come out after the Freeman film, the Prince Edward Island film, which is where you have that guy walking and you see this thing kind of running across the field and the kid turns around and runs back towards the camera.
Yeah.
Right. That one was floating around the Memorial Day footage where there was a researcher in the background making fun of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you that we're going to make $1 million off of that film. Right. The reaction of seeing a Bigfoot is completely opposite of what we expect it to be. So yeah, the reason why I feel that way is because there is that information available. Of course, not being there, not being able to hit the ground, not being able to do any of that. This is all just opinion and not an investigative opinion. So.
And I offer my opinion on those two with the disclaimer that I can be wrong. Just my gut. I think Patterson film seems more like a real creature than the Freeman does. And I can be totally wrong, but that's just there. Okay, the Bluff Creek Massacre.
Oh, dear Lord.
I just had to. I couldn't help it, Steve.
Well, let's look at the psychology of it, first of all.
Oh, boy. That's a study.
Well, it's really easy. It's really easy. If somebody commits a crime, and it's not even a crime to begin with, number one, right? So the premise of it is false. Because if you can kill 1,000 Bigfoot tomorrow and not be charged with a single crime because they're not in existence according to the law. So that's the first fallacy of it, that there was a crime committed. There wasn't. Right? Second fallacy is if they're acting like a crime had been committed, as the postulation goes, all right, you're going to commit a murder at the scene. Why would you show a film? Why would you bring attention to it? Why would you're acting completely the opposite than any offender would do it? Right? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't say, if I rob the bank, I'm not going to tomorrow cut a YouTube video. Hey, look at this bank got robbed. Look at that. Look at that. Oh, look how they did that. Look how they did this. And I'm not going to bring any attention to it. I don't want people to watch it. So why would you bring people to the scene of the crime in the first place? You wouldn't. Right. You would completely lie about that. Oh, well, this happened over on this mountain.
Not to mention, Roger Patterson was wanting to make money on that film. Just think how much money he could have made if he had actually had the body of a Sasquatch.
Right. And he wanted validation, and that's why he sent it to so many scientists and stuff like that. If you had a body, or at least a body part, that would have solved the whole thing right then and there.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And this is all based on somebody seeing what they think is blood in water after they've added a red tinting to the film as it is. And we all know that blood, when it dries very dark, right. Rust colored to black, and that it doesn't sit there and hang out as red, especially in water, because what causes that dark color, that rusting color to black, is it's basically oxidation of the hemoglobin, which is very rich in iron, which turns to rust, which turns to dark color.
So there's a question for you here, Steve. Has Steve researched the Bigfoot throwing the log video, real or hoax?
I'm not familiar.
Okay. I'm not either. You'll have to holler at me later and or send me a link to it. Here's
me right off the shoot.
There's my friend Tanya from the Bigfoot Museum of Oklahoma down in Tallahena, Oklahoma. If anyone here is ever down in the Tallahena area of southeast Oklahoma, stop in and see Tanya at her museum down there. They've done a real good job down there. And she just had the Kiamichi Mountain Bigfoot conference down there a couple of weeks ago. And I haven't talked to you since then, Tanya, so I'd like to talk to you and see how that went. There's Brent, another prime investigator right there. Looks like in his picture he has captured a juvenile Sasquatch. Let's see what else we got here. Brent. Whoops. Okay, good, Will. Video made in Canada. Okay. DNA evidence. We talked a little bit about that earlier. There is one lady that claims she has some good DNA evidence, and then there's Dr. Hart, who has kind of debunked that. And personally, my opinion on it, I don't know either of those folks, but just me thinking scientifically, wouldn't it be neat if they could sit down at a table across from each other and compare notes and decide whether that was the real thing or not?
Well, that's what you would do if you were a true scientist, wouldn't it?
Oh, I would. I mean,
but instead, we have one scientist on the particular side that has gone to the fringe, that complains that there is conspiracy. Yeah, I think we talked about that earlier too, David. Right. That was not me that interviewed him. That was actually on another show. I think I popped onto that show.
I think you and I happened to be on that. Who was that, Steve? I thought
that was Alan.
Alan.
That was the chap named Alan who said he was taking photographs of them. And
no, I mean, what show were we both on?
I think that was on the late Joe Snyder show.
Oh, okay. All right. But I remember, I think I just got a message that says, man, you really ought to pop on here. And because he's from your part of the country. And I think you were already, weighing in on it. And I noticed when I said something like, well, I live in that part of the country, farmers, they talk about stuff like that. Who is some of these law enforcement agencies you work with, whatever. And it kind of went downhill after that.
Right.
But yeah,
right,
that
right.
was, it was,
I was talking, I think I was zinging him on the NDA itself. Because there was certain legal issues, and that's the one benefit of being, a private industry investigator, is that not only I dealt with a lot of criminal law, but I also dealt with a lot of private sector law, family law, and I've dealt with all kind of the whole full spectrum of law. So I understand a good amount about business law. I understand a lot about probate law. I understand a lot about family law, and I understand a lot about criminal law.
Mm-hmm. But that's a prime example of going to the why. Why do people, talk about it? And the sense of belonging. I mean, you talked to him a few weeks after that, and he, he opened up about it, and he just basically was a lonely individual, and he wanted to be a part of a group. I haven't heard from the guy since then. I don't know if you have.
I hear from him very sporadically.
Really? Okay. Yeah. But anyway, somebody had a question or a statement here, Steve. I think the one will
still don't know about it.
Yeah.
My health has been a little bit of an issue with some of the, we talked about it earlier, and so I'm still in the process of trying to get myself up to full speed. But there's so much evidence that I deal with on a daily basis that it's really difficult to, people don't realize that I probably get about 3 to 4 requests a day to look at evidence.
Wow.
And I have to kind of filter that out to like 1 a day, if I have time. So it gets pretty surmounting over time. And it's just the nature of the beast. So some of the stuff I won't be able to really pick up on. And then again, there's times when somebody shows me something and there's really not much I can do with it. So I'm not going to render an opinion on stuff that I can't really dig into. If I dig in as much as I can, if I hit a brick wall, I move on. And unfortunately, it's because of the volume of cases.
Yeah, I actually had today somebody message me saying that somebody near where I live was out hunting, and his dogs cornered a juvenile Sasquatch, and it killed one of his dogs, and he shot it, and I had a video, and you could hear the wild pigs squealing as the dogs attacked it. And of course, I'm like going, no, that's pigs. And I just ignored it. And later on, the person that sent it to me said, Yeah, that was debunked. He was fooling around. I'm like, you think, you know, but hey, I'd throw this in here. You're a musician too, aren't you?
Well, I was a singer in a band quite a while ago.
Like a hardcore metal band, right?
Metal band, correct. Yep. Sinister
Guilty
Recall.
as charged. I'm presently in one of those. So
Very
it's a lot
good.
of fun. Okay, here's it. David Weather said, I heard something ripping the bark off a tree while I was in my deer stand last year. Unmistakable sound, and I would not get down to look back there. And, you know, that's actually a common reaction to something like that. I've heard stuff like that in the past. It would be neat to, and here he elaborates it, a very loud ripping of bark off the tree. I have to hunt this area alone, and I would not get out and look behind me. I did not want to see. So next time, look, do it for the team, David.
And you turn around and it's an armadillo doing it.
Yeah, well, big armadillo if it's ripping the lip.
I know those things sound like tanks coming through the woods.
Let's see. Okay, let's segue away from the mental illnesses and the hoaxes and the such as that, and go into if you would share with us some of the more compelling cases that you've looked into.
Well, there's been a ton of compelling cases I've looked into, going back to the mid 2000s, and one of them, I've had, you know, in all the sightings, the commonality is that they have some form where the witnesses want validation, they want answers, they want to understand what they've seen. I'm very, very careful of those people that have had a Bigfoot sighting and then suddenly know all the answers. Like, I hate that term, I'm a knower. Right?
Yeah.
What do you know? Because, well, I know they exist. Well, what else do you know? Because they make a lot of claims that because they've seen one, they're the authority on it. And that's an issue because, hey, you know what? I see a car out there. I drive the car. Doesn't mean I know how to fix the transmission.
Right.
Right. I don't know how to change a ball joint. Sorry. So, just because you see something, but the legit witness is looking for validation. They want to understand, you know, what they've seen. They want to feel like they're not alone, and that's a huge part of it. You know, I you know, there was one case that started out, and it was 2003, where, you know, these two boys had were in summer school, and they were talking with their science teacher in summer school, and they had an off-kilter day, and they were talking about UFOs at the time. And as the class emptied out, now this was reported to me by the teacher, not by the kids themselves. And as the kids filtered out, the two stayed behind and said, listen, we want to tell you something. This happened last weekend while we were out playing on the railroad tracks. And we didn't tell our parents because, hey, we're not supposed to be playing on the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. But they were walking down the railroad tracks. They heard something which sounded like almost like an owl type of like whoop. They turn around and here's this large bipedal hairy creature. Saw them and it just kind of meandered up the hill and up and over and done. But they wanted to report that.
Larry, I have not. It said, has anyone tried a dog whistle?
I have.
And?
Nothing.
Okay.
Except got some coyotes hollering.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That
was one particular case. Very realistic. I did end up finding a track at the time. In fact, I was with a news reporter at the time that was doing an article. We originally had slated to do something else. I said, well, this case just came in. And the news reporter, you know, on the way up was asking me, what am I looking for? I said, well, I'm looking for a tree that, you know, maybe some trees that have been twisted and bent down as a movement. And she actually found a tree that was knocked down, fresh pine sapling that had been twisted and pulled down. And 6-8 feet up the embankment, there was this depression in the leaves. Pull the leaves back, and here's this beautiful print. It was about 13.5 inches by about 5 inches wide.
Wow.
So I was like, wow, the kids must have seen something, and it was going in the general direction of where the kids had last seen it. So that was quite interesting. And I reached out actually. Somehow I managed after all these years to get the kids' names, and I reached out to one of them. The kid was like, well, now he's a 30-something-year-old guy. And he's like, oh, yeah, I remember that very, very distinctly. Definitely happened. Definitely. He goes, let me get in contact. So I'm arranging that slowly. Let me get in contact with my buddy, see if the three of us can get together and talk about it some more. So
yeah, there is those that happened a long time ago, and then they grow up and they're still. I had a case like that, and I remember I was in the 8th grade. Okay, and I remember these two brothers and even a neighbor of theirs that was older. They come to school and they were talking about this monster walking across the field at night. I live very rural. I'm out, 30 miles from the nearest town of any size. So, and these people lived more remote than me. And what they, we do at night was kids, moonlit night, we'd all go out in the woods or the fields and see what would walk up. And they were doing that. They said a cow had died. So they were sitting over there across the field just watching in the moon. And some big bipedal large form comes walking out of the woods in their direction, steps over the fence with, 5-wire barbed wire fence without breaking stride. And fast forward 20 years, roughly, and I was contacted by the Travel Channel to help them make that documentary. I was on Bigfootville. So I got in contact with one of those brothers. I said, hey, do you remember back when we was in the 8th grade, when you guys come to school? He says, yeah, I remember. I said, well, did that really happen? Yeah, it did. Before it was over with, I had contacted his brother and the woman who was by then an RN, and she's like, yeah, I remember it. And they were all on that show and talked about it.
Sure. Yeah,
so, I'm like,
another amazing, and this is, see, you and me, Dave, we have the benefit of being in this for a long time. So a lot of the newer researchers don't realize the pleasure of reaching out to somebody after 20 years and getting that affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
I remember another one that I wasn't even really involved in. It was kind of by accident. I was going through John Green stuff, and he was talking about a sighting in Waterford, New York, which now is a very built-up area. But back in the 80s, it was a lot less built up of an area. So I said, just on a whim, I FOIL requested the police department of the police report, and I got it, and it had the names of the children involved. And there were 3 children that saw Bigfoot, and they were so insistent upon that they wanted to call the police. Police responded. They walked around. They couldn't find anything. They found a dead muskrat. That was it. And they kind of left it as is. Well, I reached out to one of those kids, and they're like, hell yeah, we did see it. This is what we saw. This is where it was. And the cop was kind of not really believing us, but it is what we saw. They thought that maybe we had misidentified something, but no, it was X, Y, and Z. But it's amazing to do that kind of research. And again, it's all about validation. We don't see anybody trying to profit or put their name out there or try to make it more than what it is. When you start seeing those things, that's when you start worrying. When you see somebody plastering all over 80, I had a recent one that at best was a misidentification and at worst was an outright hoax. I believe it was the latter. But this guy said that he was taking video. Oh, look at the Sasquatch looking at me. It was following me, and now it's crouched down, and we've been staring at each other for 10 minutes. It was a stump. But he was trying to mislead us to where he was actually filming it. Right. We found the actual spot and filmed the same exact thing he did. So there was no way he could have thought that was moving at all. Right?
Right.
So, and he was posting it over like a dozen different groups. Oh, look at this video. Look at that video. Look at this video. Look at that video. And there's patterns to people that have these types of things versus the real people. The real people want very little to do with it.
I'm not sure, Larry, I'm totally understanding this. Steve, look at that. back tracks, large human-like footprints, how they start out of nowhere and end in the middle of nowhere?
Answer to that, no. There is always if you're looking at pure ground, you're probably missing something.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
I don't care how good you are, you're probably missing something. I have tracked one. I've tracked more than one, but I've tracked one in particular back in 2006, to where this person had, it was a 5-witness encounter. 3 had seen it. They ran up 20 minutes later. 2 more people see it. Same general area. Find the last sighting of it where it was crouched down. Actually followed it right down to the road where I lost it. You could see the breaks and the mashing of the trees. Didn't find a single track, but you could find where something large had pushed through there. It breaks at the 5'9", 10 foot, 6 foot level, or something was just going through the wood line right down to the road. Doing this, you learn to become a tracker. You learn, you should learn to be a tracker if you're out in the woods. And doing this kind of work, you should know your tracking, know your scat, know your calls, know all that stuff. And but where I hear those kind of stories is usually in snow. Like, oh yeah, there was this tracks that went out in the field. They started out of nowhere, and then they went for a little while, and they just stopped. Well, they're in snow. And what happens is that it's probably a bird, a large bird maybe, or even a crow or a raven, and they're hopping along, right? And then they fly off, and then that sun hits that snow, melts them out to makes it look like they're big tracks. And then people say, oh, unless they see the Bigfoot actually do it, Bigfoot didn't do it.
But yeah, I mean, if you're talking tracks seemingly disappearing, like out here, I've never found just perfect tracks.
Right.
Because you get down there especially southeast Oklahoma in the Kiamichis, you've got a lot of leaf litter, a lot of pine needles, a lot of rocks, gravel. I've found very good impressions and such as that. And I don't know if he's still in the chat or not. The Livewire did a long investigation on his place where these creatures were actually coming up watching his kids play, and found and looked into that a lot. And I want to have him on my show here in the next couple of weeks if we can get that coordinated. But I found like a pathway with these deep impressions in the leaves and stuff. I even did cast one. It's not good, as far as detailed, but it was about a 15-inch tracks, but then there was those of one a little bit smaller than that. And then another set of even smaller than that, So, and that was one of the things I looked into that was very, very compelling, to say the least.
I mean, one of the things I always say is people say, "Oh, these tracks disappear," and it was on, Occam's razor. Chances are you missed a sign or something, or they did something. They took a left when you went right, or vice versa.
Right. And
because what's the suggestion there, that the Bigfoot disappeared?
Right. Well, what I was actually going toward was, you'd find some place where these was, and then you've got into rocks, or you've got into just tall grass and stuff like that. Now, if you've got like a plowed field, and out in the middle of that field, all of a sudden tracks start, and all of a sudden they stop. Somebody's making stuff up.
Right. And the other thing too is people, we sometimes we give ourselves much more. A lot of times we don't give ourselves enough credit, and other times we give ourselves too much credit.
Brent solved it.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Right there.
If you think about it, we tend to give ourselves too much credit when these tracks disappear. Well, it was there. Mm-hmm. But we don't give ourselves enough credit also when the Bigfoot disappears. Like, oh, well, it's just, these things are just so much better in the forest than we are, and they're just so much smarter than we are. No, Occam's razor on the whole thing. They're using portals. One of they use fire or complicated tools. One of they wear clothes in such a parasitic environment. Because people don't understand that the forest are have a lot of parasites, and you would be wearing protective clothing if you had that level of intelligence to use portals and get on spaceships and all that other stuff. So,
well, that would explain Chewbacca, wouldn't
that's right.
it?
He just wore a bandolero and a bowcaster.
Yeah, here's another buddy of mine, Brian Terrell from Red Dirt Cryptid Investigations. And I'll tell you, Brian, he gets out there a lot looking around. And I've had him on the show several times. Good to see you there. We ended up with a pretty good crowd here, Steve.
Yep. Well,
I was a little bit concerned right there at first where there wasn't nobody that we could see lurking around. It's like, well, we may just be recording.
And if anybody wants to come over on my show, drop me a line. Drop me a line. We'll get John.
Yeah. If anybody has any suggestions, somebody you'd like to see me try to have on here, definitely drop it in the comments or shoot me an email or something. Be glad to look into that. Within reason, I had somebody trying to get me to bring, it was back when I would have moderators and stuff. I don't anymore, but was trying to help out and pointed out this one person. I said, no, that person is so full of it. I don't want to be related. And they're like, well, yeah. And he wants money too. I'm like,
oh no,
wants me to pay. I was like, oh, he had no, thank you.
Red flag.
Oh yeah. But anyway, I think it's just the nature of the mystery, whether it's cryptids or UFOs or whatever, you're going to attract a wide range of people, some just wanting to have fun with it. As we see on Facebooks, the picture of the tree overexposed and blurry and, find the Bigfoot in the, the pareidolia stuff. A lot, people have a lot of fun with that, but that's not.
Well, there is a Bigfoot group out there calling themselves the Bigfoot Believers or Bigfoot Believers Group. And it's a newer Bigfoot Believer. There's like 3 or 4 of them, but there's a newer one that's out there. And, I've realized, and kind of Nikki kind of led me into that. Yeah, and I agree with Nikki, but I had started noticing that there was a lot of posts on there of just innocuous type of Bigfoot posts. Do you believe a Bigfoot can rip somebody's head off? And it was written by, a double name like Osmani or something. And all of them have double names on these, like Osmani, Watson was another one. Peluso or something, or Pusamo. And I realized I started looking at some of these accounts. A lot of the accounts were locked. Like you couldn't see this person beyond the fact that, who they are. But I found a couple of them that were unlocked. And they had a lot of folks from a lot of different foreign countries that are prone to scams. And I actually found one that actually had a fake page of a military guy, a major general by the name of John O'Connor, and they were claiming his name was John Connor, and that was a mistake. His name is actually John O'Connor.
Yeah, John Connor.
So what it turns out to be is I think that group was created to collect information on people in a particular area, so they can clone their accounts and play scams on other people.
Well, then.
So just be warned, anybody's not there, check out be careful. You start seeing those double name posts, do not respond to them, because that's how they get into your profile. You respond, then they can click on you, then now they know all about you.
Okay, you've been looking into this about the same amount of years as I have. And one thing I've noticed is there's different fads that shows up in this. Like, probably the most prominent is the whole Bigfoot is the Nephilim.
Oh yeah. I mean,
and when I wrote a little bit about that, when it had other theories on Bigfoot in my last book, and I started that chapter with a huge disclaimer that, like, look, I'm not endorsing these things, but if you're new to this and looking into this subject, you're going to run into this. And I thought, the Nephilim thing, that's Scott Carpenter's deal. So I had his number. I called Scott up. I said, look, if you don't mind, would like to use your opinion why you think that's feasible. I don't want to misrepresent. And he was happy to say it, but back in the day, did you ever hear anything like that? Back in the late 90s and stuff? Really? I never heard anything about that back
You
then.
you heard all the fringe theories. They're biblical creatures, Nephilim. They're psychic because you have the grandfather of this whole paranormal babble,
Lloyd
the
Pye.
psychic Sasquatch was John Kawani Lapsaritis.
Oh yeah, I've actually got one of his books.
I'm sorry. But
Yeah,
then,
some of the
then
Sasquatch are big and ape-like, and some of them are female and kind of hot, according to the book. But it was an entertaining read. But no,
and then you
back in the
then you have cats like Dr. Matt Johnson who completely went off the rails.
it's a good point you brought up, Dr. Johnson. Do you think his initial encounter?
Yes.
Because that, well, I remember when that came out, I was like, "Oh man, that's compelling."
What happens is you have these certain intellectual people that really overthink things, and what happens is you become so sure of the Homo sapiens' ability to solve a mystery like mega quick, and you and I know as investigators that hey, there's murders that get solved 50 years after their commission. Right? Investigations are pragmatic and take time a lot of times. What certain scientists don't understand, and certain people in the general public don't understand, is that you just can't solve something. But when your mind is such an intricate mind, another example is John Eric Beckford, who was a flesh and blood guy, and then he snapped. Very intelligent people. What the hell happened is that their mind, for whatever reason, cannot wrap itself around the actual mystery. Why can't we solve this? So instead of coming to the logical conclusion that maybe we're coming at the problem the wrong way, they switch it up and say, perhaps it's not what we think it is, and then come into these fantastical leaps of science that they come up with. And that's the unfortunate thing I think that's happening. And I happen to agree with Chris Kimball as well. That he thinks that it also explains to another prominent researcher. I agree. When you think about things too much, and we tend, and I know as an investigator, you probably think like I do. We're not thinking about this all the time. We have other things, other hobbies, other interests.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right. That we work on. You're into music, so you're into music. I'm into other mysteries as well. So it's not an obsession. And I think what happens is, in every single case we have here of these two last characters, John Eric Beckford, Dr. Matt Johnson.
I remember John Beckford. Beckjord, wasn't it?
Yep, Beckford. Yep.
Eric Beckjord.
His actual name was John Eric, but yeah, we just go. Yeah,
I remember the pictures that he would put there. He would have orbs coming out of his ears and stuff.
Sure.
I mean, it was wild stuff.
But what an intelligent guy he was. He was.
Oh, I'm sure he was.
He was a
matter of fact, Steenberg, Thomas Steenberg actually knew him because I remember talking to Thomas.
I did too. I did too. Talked to him a lot of times. He was a member of Mensa, the Genius Club. He had an incredible idea. Graduated from Berkeley. Really smart, well-rounded guy. But the problem is that obsession screws the mind up. There's a couple other ones. There's another researcher out in Vermont who has an educational background. I think he overthinks everything and has become very romantical, and that's the problem. When people overthink things, they become very romantic into the field. Oh, Bigfoot's this or that.
Well, it's we talk about some of the obvious hoaxes, mistaken identity, and such as that. But obviously, you and I know there's something to this, or we wouldn't devote our time to it like we do. But also, we don't want to waste our time because I'm getting older. I don't have that much time left. But yeah, Chris Beckjord was hilarious.
Let me ask you this question, David. I think there's two ways of looking at this mystery. We either look at it locally or globally. And as an investigator, I always look at it locally. Each case is a case-by-case basis. right?
Mhm.
But when you start thinking about wasting time, now you start looking at a more global type of situation, because you're like, oh, geez, I'm trying to get to the end of the road here about this, and these people are wasting my time. When I look at it locally, I'm not wasting my time. That's another case closed. Okay, we can put this one to rest. So there's two ways of looking at it, locally and globally. And yes, if you're looking at it globally, it's a waste of time. But if you're looking at it locally, it keeps you at least in the right frame of mind that, okay, I'm able to clear this one off the board and move on to the next.
Well, globally, it's a curiosity to me in the fact that pretty much every culture I've looked into, at least somewhere in their history, has some folklore of something that resembles a Sasquatch. But what can I investigate personally? I've got to keep that locally. But now, when we're talking about investigating, this is something you and I discussed a little bit backstage. And this is more for anybody that's new to this, that wants to start investigating. When you have reports, are lucky enough to get one that's fresh, it's very important to try to interview that individual if they are willing quickly, because especially if it's something traumatic, because the things that the mind can't make sense of eventually starts to fill in the blanks unconsciously. And that's
Very
whether
true.
it's a car accident, a murder, whether it's a crime, whether it's a shark attack or something like that. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and like there was a well-known Bigfoot sighting in Oklahoma from years back. And I heard that way back there when it happened. But if you hear it repeated now, it don't really much resemble the original. So you want to run with that, Steve?
Kind of reminds me of that scene from Johnny Dangerously where everybody was telling the, hey, tell Johnny this, hey, tell Johnny that, and then they finally get down the whole line and it's completely different, and Johnny gets it right away. And that's not what I said. Yeah, but I know this. I know this. This line of questioning here.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High, when Jeff Spicoli told off the
right.
when he brought the pizza in and he called the teacher a name. By the time it got around, he had pulled a knife on him.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
And that's why it's so important to look at history. And even today, I mean, just this past week alone, we discovered that, and this is going to start a firestorm, but J.W. Burns did not coin the term Sasquatch. Found that out. And the reason we know that is we found the original article.
Really?
And the original article, he is quoting somebody as saying it was a Sasquatch. Now, whether or not he misheard it is one thing, but the fact is, in the original article, he doesn't say that, hey, there is this creature known as Sasquatch. He says, I'll let this guy tell the story. And the guy says, in quotes, well, we know this ancient tribe of people called the Sasquatch. So whether he heard it or misheard it or when he was writing it down, that's one thing. But he didn't coin the term. The person he was talking to, this First Nations tribe member, is the one who coined it. He was just quoting him, and he was quoting what he had heard. And that's the facts. I don't care what John Green said 5 years later, 10 years later, 50 years later. We have the original article. That's the source.
Now, what was the actual word? Sasquatch is not really the native word. It's an anglicized version of it. It was, I can't pronounce it. It was a shorter, like a sesquite or some weirdly spelled thing.
It's Sasquatch.
It wasn't exactly Sasquatch.
But if you call it Sasquatch or Sasquatch, that could easily be misinterpreted as Sasquatch.
Well, exactly. That's
right.
Like
and how many people when I'm in a show come up there and go, "Oh, you believe in the Sasquatch?" It's not a fruit. It's not a squash. It's a squatch. And they don't, Sasquatch.
Oh, yeah.
So you see how pronunciation can lead.
Here we go.
Misspelling.
Nikki.
Right. Sasquatch. Right. Or Sasquatch.
Like so
if somebody says that, you could very well hear, like, what did I hear?
In language too. Like, for instance, my wife, she grew up in South Korea. the way they write their language, very different than, our English letters. So when when we try to spell, that's why you'll see different, like Korean or even Japanese words spelled differently in English, but they're trying to say the same thing. I imagine it's the same with some of the native words like that. There's Curious Cryptid Raptor. When the portals are so close together, there's only room for one step between them.
That's right.
I
noticed the Buckwist crew wrote, he never allowed, Eric and I, we had a lot of great conversations on phones. I didn't consider him an enemy. He was never a troublemaker. I didn't consider, he's somebody that had a alternative view than I did. And we loved needling each other about it. And that was the fun thing. I was able to get him on my show very early on when I started my radio show back in 2006. And I was able to have one of the most funnest and funniest shows you would ever hear because, man, he said some things that were just so off the chart. And I remember him saying, there was another report of a Bigfoot wearing human blue jeans and wearing a tattered shirt on the side of a road. And I'm like, Eric, that wasn't a Bigfoot. That was a hippie.
That's hilarious.
And, it was just one of those things where the chemistry behind me playing the straight guy to his nonsense, it was so funny.
Well, and I think it's good to have a conversation with people that you don't agree with on everything. Makes you think, hey, there is Blue Line Bigfoot. You familiar with those fellas, Steve?
I am not. No.
Nice guys. They're from, I believe, upstate New York.
Well, have them reach out to me. You can find the contact page on my YouTube channel, or you can go on my website and reach out to me. We'll get together, have coffee or something.
They're kind of a combination, and I hope they can correct me here, but they're a team of these two guys, and they do Bigfoot stuff, and they also do some good comedy on there.
Excellent.
So they're some fun guys,
and I have a hell of a sense of humor. So I actually,
if you got a sense of humor, you'll love those guys.
I actually reached out to the Butchie kids. Remember the Butchie kids?
The what?
The Butchie kids, and they make some great, very obvious Bigfoot hoax, Bigfoot comedy, not hoax, but Bigfoot comedy things, and they'd be like, oh my God, there's a Bigfoot. And the Bigfoot would be doing something ridiculous. Like they had a Bigfoot pushing a baby Bigfoot in a stroller. And then another Bigfoot drives by in a car and runs him over. Stuff like that.
Man.
Oh my God, that beast has got road rage. Stuff like that. It was funny. And some of the.
So, hey, anybody in chat, before we start to wrap this up, we've been going about a little over an hour and a half. Any questions for Steve? Or me for that matter, ask it now. Looks like we got a pretty good number in chat, Steve. We got 48 hanging out, watching at the moment. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and if anybody's not subbed over the channel, come on over, say hello.
Yeah, go check out.
That way, we try to have fun at times.
So what's your channel on YouTube? Squatch DTV.
Yep, at Squatch DTV, all one word, no hyphens.
Squatch DTV, and don't forget, y'all, it's latecomers. We were talking about Steve's new book, The Psychology of Bigfoot: A Guide to Understanding Bigfoot Claims. I've read this. I bought it as soon as it would come out on Steve's channel that his book was out. I ordered one right there on the spot and read it. And I told Steve, as soon as I got it, I said, I want to have you on the show to talk about it as soon as I get through reading it. Yep. And here we are.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And
it's useful. Anybody that wants to go into investigating this mystery, there's some very valid pointers in it. Steve goes in depth on his experiences, into some true crime things that he uses for comparisons. The human psyche is just,
it's cool. It's
complicated. Uh-oh, here's one.
Here, I'm going to put that right in there in my chat too. It's there you go.
Steve, what is your opinion on Dogman?
I am not a pro Dogman person. Sorry, is what it is. I'm not an expert on it. I don't study it. I don't follow it. It just seems to me that the legs of a dog that are reported just do not seem to work with bipedalism. So it makes no sense to me as far as that. Could some of them be misidentified Bigfoot? Absolutely. Could some of them be of a paranormal nature? Absolutely. Could some of them just be fantasy? Yeah. I mean, just the same with the Bigfoot stuff too. I mean, there's always going to be truth lies and what lies in between. So I think it's all of the above there.
Keith, I will point you, if you're interested in that subject, check out, see if he's still on here. Check out Red Dirt Cryptid. My friend Brian there, he investigates anything that goes bump in the night, especially if it's in the woods, whether it's werewolves, dogman, Bigfoot, or whatever. He takes reports on all of that, and he's got quite a library on that. My opinion on it, as I've said before, a bipedal, basically a Bigfoot type body with a dog's head, to me would not be a naturally occurring thing. Then to me, that would fall more into the paranormal.
There's a good question.
You know, what's that? Which one?
It's a good question that popped up there in caps over there.
Kansas Squatch. Have you ever been pressured by nefarious characters to not pursue reports or stories?
Well, I think the only time that's ever happened was the Georgia Bigfoot hoax, when Viscardi was trying to get everybody to sign an NDA, not talk about it. And I refused to do that. I was the only one to refuse to do that. Everybody was like going along, well, okay, whatever you say, boss. And like, no, I'm not covering up a hoax with another hoax. Sorry. I invited myself out there. He didn't want me there. I got myself there. And thank goodness to a good friend that was able to get out of there. No. Other than that, that has been the only time. I'm independent. Nobody pressures me. I look at what I look at. I've investigated the Patterson-Gimlin film. I've investigated a number of different things. And if I have any relevant or any earth-shattering material, that will get released. As simple as that. I'm independent. I do not fall into any necessarily party lines on anything. And to be truthful, I am a member of the BFRO, so I have access to their reporting system, but I've never been pressured by there to either rule on one way or the other either. It's not like that. Matter of fact, there was a couple of things that myself and Mr. Moneymaker have disagreed on, and actually kind of talked it out in public, in a public manner as well. And so no, nobody ever will try to compromise what I have to say, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, if that was directed at me too, no, I haven't. Other than the occasional just butthead over the past, but I tend to just, if people are obnoxious, just not to go around them. That's just maybe that's just because I'm getting older and don't feel the need to interact.
Raptor made a good point. Most channels are making their own Hong Kong Phooey just to get your membership. I agree. There is a lot of channels out there that are doing that, but there's a lot of good channels out there too. But they're not the huge ones. It seems like for whatever reason, YouTube seems to propagate these story channels. Like I say, one of my hashtags is no scriptozoology. And I find that there are a lot of shows that the guests seem a little scripted, and usually you don't see their faces or you don't hear their real names, or a combination of both. So there are a bunch of channels that do that, but there's a number of channels that don't either. And you have to watch the material, and you have to understand that it's very difficult sometimes. People say, well, what do you think of this channel? What do you think of that channel? Listen, unless there's something really egregious, it's really hard to tell if somebody is having a legitimate experience or having what they perceive to be a legitimate experience. And even my own stuff, I talk about that movement we had in the woods. I can't say for sure that was a Bigfoot, nor do I call it a Bigfoot. All I say is it sounded a little unusual, but
it's certainly worth documenting.
Right.
And I wanted to get back to this. David Weathers was talking earlier about how when he was hearing that behind his deer stand, how he didn't turn and look. He didn't want to see it. And that things like that happen. I remember my good friend Cornell, I think the second time he came here and woke me and my son up. We was in this tent next to him. And I usually, anybody goes camping with me, if it's warmer weather, I don't sleep in a tent. I sleep out in the open. It was blithering cold. So we were all in a tent. And something come and stood right beside his tent out there in the middle of nowhere. And he woke us up. He was yelling something behind the tent. Of course, we got out and whatever it was gone. But he was talking about feeling kind of silly later, or not silly, but bad about it later, because he had come all that way down there for that. And he said, and when potentially it might have been outside the tent, he said, I just wanted it to go away. So don't be too hard on yourself, because that's self-preservation
and think about that position too. You're sleeping, you're in a very disadvantageous position, right? I don't think I would want something next to my tent, being awoke and going, oh, I'm at, number one, I can't see around me. Number two, I'm maybe not perhaps geared up to deal with something like that. So there's a lot of disadvantages why you do not want to take advantage of that particular scenario. But conversely, there are people that have preconceived notions, that have their own fears. That's all part of the psyche too. I'm not going to look because I know there's such a thing as Bigfoot. I'm afraid to look and come to that reality. Maybe, perhaps that's part of it.
Well, it's the fear of it's the unknown. It's like when you were talking earlier in the night about the video of the window peeper.
Right.
Okay. What is a reaction? Of course, everybody reacts different. Anybody that says, like, by gosh, if that was me, I would have this. Well, you have no idea.
Right.
When something really traumatic, just off the charts, unexpected happens, you don't really know. You can train for it,
right,
or whatever, like police officer, soldier. But when it happens like that, you don't really know until it does.
You got to understand, fears come from preconceived notions, right?
Right.
Naturally, as a primate, we're curious. Something goes boom, we look, right? But if you know that there is a chemical release with a boom, right? So you already have some predetermined knowledge. When you hear that boom, you're going the other way, right? You're not looking, you're going the other way. So,
Randy.
So you have to understand that, and that's probably the most obvious explanation I can make on that. Graphically explain something in that particularly. It's because there are preconceived notions that we have fear of something.
Right.
A lot of times we have no fear because we have no preconceived notions.
And as Brian says here, Red Dirt Cryptid, sometimes you're just flat out dumbfounded.
Truth. There is no greater answer, than
but
saying,
how unlikely. I'm telling you right now, if I looked up here and there was a 7-foot Sasquatch or more leaning down, looking in my window at me, I probably wouldn't go, let's hold on here. I think I'll.
Right.
Wow.
There are so many, people talk about that too, is the other thing is people talk about, with so many cameras out there and so many phone cameras. Well, I got to get my phone. I got to pull it out wherever it is. I got to take my eyes off of what I'm looking at. And that's huge, because if you're in a forest setting, let's think about that. Now you're worried. You got this 8-foot thing that's not in your brain, number one. What the hell am I looking at? I'm going to take my eyes off to get my phone and go, let me get my camera app up. Right?
I gotta say, it's Raptor, you're not disrupting anything, man. You're welcome. You're fine. Don't even worry about that.
I didn't say anything.
I used it. This happened to me last deer season. I'm up, and this is how people talking about all the cameras and stuff. How quick we have in this is not Bigfoot related, but I'm sitting in my deer stand and I have my phone and it's not a stand. I built a deer house. Okay. It's like, I've got cedar posts coming up and I built a tin house around it. I lower the windows out and I had my phone sitting right there. I was like, well, if it's a deer, it's not going to shoot it. I'm going to get a picture of it. A river otter, which we have them here, but I'd never seen one before, comes like loping across the little field in front of me, which is about probably 25 yards wide between this creek and that in the woods. At first I'm like, wow, it's an otter. By the time I got my phone out and the camera on, that little critter was already in the grass and out of view.
Right.
That was not a scary monster coming across the field. Had it been a Sasquatch, how much of that time would have been spent on dumbfounded, completely surprised and shocked? Oh, wait, I should get a picture. Oh, it's gone.
So,
another
question that popped up, or actually we talked about this past weekend on one of my shows, was one with all the trail cameras. And
that's a good one.
No, it's not.
It's not?
Okay. So how many cameras, trail cameras, do you think, say, in a particular day that are deployed nationwide?
Well, I imagine a whole lot.
Maybe 100,000?
No, honestly, I haven't thought about it, Steve, but I mean, I've got them out now.
How many?
On my property. I think 3.
So let's put it this way. If we have on any given day 100,000 trail cameras deployed, and that's a big number. That's a huge number. That 100,000 trail cameras are being deployed at once today in the United States. We find out that the United States is 700 million acres of forested land that is unpopulated.
Mm-hmm.
That represents less than 1% of the unforested population.
Right.
Needles in haystacks. You got to let that creature come just in that range where that camera shoots. And you're dealing with, square miles of areas. And
as far as that.
So that's why I say that's the reason why. I mean, you have 700 million acres in the United States. And even if you deploy 100,000 cameras, you're talking, it's a fraction of 1% of ground cover.
We go into, and don't ask me, I'm not going to say I think there's this many Bigfoots in, North America. I don't know. But again, I've made the comment that, they said there's a lot of Bigfoot reports. And again, I'll put a disclaimer. I could be wrong, but I believe, Bigfoot reports are many, but actual Bigfoot are few. Now, the interesting thing, I leave my game cameras on video. I've gotten bobcats, coyotes, foxes, deer. And the most entertaining one was the raccoons that I left some feed out and they were eating it. And you can see one of them keep staring at it. And then it is shaking. The raccoon is trying, and I've got the straps around the tree.
Trying to get the camera.
Raccoon is trying to run off. He's trying to steal the camera, but he doesn't get it, But yeah, I mean, there's the hope that, some Sasquatch will get careless and actually, come through there. I've never gotten anything on game camera suspicious. Randy Harrington here had a message for you, Steve, and I'm not sure I'm sure you know who he's talking about there.
Well, I didn't do a show about Ed Smith and Daisy in the Box. I had a show with DW on, and that, of course, I brought that up. But I always look at it as it's an interesting footnote in the history of the Bigfoot mystery. But and I know Mr. Smith was a very complicated hoaxer and very well thought out. And I often wonder what was the motivations behind that. Not quite sure. Maybe he wanted to belong to some group. I don't know. But again, I wasn't there. I wasn't the focus of Ed Smith, so I don't know.
And of course, the bookless crew AI, yeah, that's only going to get, the AI is going to be worse. And well, depending on who you are, if you're the ones perpetrating the hoaxes, that's going to get better.
But here's the interesting thing I found out about AI is that if you put any AI photograph into error level analysis tests, they fail. They fail.
Really?
Yeah. So it's very easy to determine that because somehow they're layered. So,
okay. But yeah, I had Randy Harrington. He did a podcast with me a few months back, and we had a real good turnout for that. And David, I've thought about it as well. Thing about trail cams, they're typically left out long terms, have hours of time. It's weird. They haven't really caught anything. I'll say this, Steve, that we know of.
Well, I believe there was one in Vermont that caught one. I have that on my site. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I investigated it back in 2010. So, analyzed by an optics scientist, the late Dr. Bruce Maccabee. And it wasn't something in front of the camera, so it eliminated that it was a bird or something.
Okay.
And had a very high what they call a high photographic noise level. And I can't explain it, but like I say, these creatures are not everywhere. So it's really difficult. I mean, that's why we go out a lot of times and not see anything. Well, guess why? You put trail cameras out, they don't see anything either. Mm-hmm. But then you have to call in the question. And you're like, how many places do we have that we deploy cameras where there are known Bigfoot sightings? I mean, like recent. Like I'm having this activity on my. Yeah, well, I agree. I agree with that wholeheartedly too. Is that the ideal place to deploy trail cameras is on, hey, listen, you get this farmer or this residence in a rural area that's having these Bigfoot encounters, and then deploy your cameras there and see what happens. That would be the ultimate thing, but they're few and far between because a lot of times by the time you get the report, like we say, a lot of times we get the reports months or years after it happens.
Mm-hmm. Pyro, I don't think so. The stories that some channels read to see if they were created by AI. I'm sure a lot of them actually are, but is there
there actually is
on Red?
Okay. So what you need to do, there are certain AI detectors, and what you would have to do is take a transcript of those stories and put them in those decipher programs, and they'll tell you the likelihood that it's AI or not. So
really?
There is a way, yeah.
I knew there was something to do with photographs and stuff. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I have seen some disturbing things with music lately, though. Man, Steve, it's going to get to the point where you're not going to know if some really neat new song that somebody says they wrote and recorded, except the fact that it's 10 times better than they're capable of. But, it's just... Yeah, as time goes, that stuff's going to become more of a problem. See, a large percentage of people that on trail camera are not putting them out on the internet for fear of ridicule. And I'm sure there may be that's a possibility.
There may be a few out there that are legit photos that people. I've heard of. And I had this contact with the. And of course, this all could be horse manure too. I always. Every once in a while, and any good researcher, especially if you're out there publicly, somebody will try to hoke you by claiming this or claiming that. I had one guy, and he's kind of fallen off, claim he was a border agent near the Canadian border. He claims that there's been some evidence there and some trail cameras and yada, yada, yada. But, I don't know what he was expecting me to do to go public with that or have him on a show or something like that. I'm sorry. I need to see some receipts. If you're going to make claims like that, I want to see some receipts necessarily.
Well, Steve, we've been going like 2 hours now.
We certainly have.
Yeah, we better call this. We might have to take a rain check and do another one of these soon.
Yep.
Because we ended up with 50 people at one time here. That's a pretty good turnout for the live. So man, everybody in chat, I appreciate you guys stopping by and throwing your hat in the ring on the comments. Everybody respectful and all that.
Great questions tonight.
Good questions. Steve, man, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on here. And again, Steve's book, good book. I read it. It's entertaining as well as informative. It's got some good pointers on investigating on there. In the description below, I've got the Amazon link to that, as well as the link to my book. If you haven't bought it, if you already bought it, buy two, you know. But anyway, check out Steve's channel, Squatch DTV. And until next time, y'all got any ideas of people you'd like to see me have on? Just shoot me an email or so. And Richard Stone, get in touch with me. Anyway, Steve, anything else? Or
no, that's it. Everybody, be safe out there and, keep it real. That's all I can say. It's about the truth. It's not about fluff garbage or anything like that. It's about the truth. And we can all work together towards that truth. Well,
be open-minded. Be open-minded in your investigations, but not gullible.
Right. Keeping an open mind. Tenet number 2 is, you can keep an open mind, but that doesn't mean throwing out the science book.
Right. Well, okay.
All right.
Good night, everybody. Till next time, you guys take care.